stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting. We share stories for many reasons, to persuade, to entertain, to connect. What we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're perceived by the people you're interacting with. When you figure out which stories to share, difficult bosses and coworkers, successes, failures, the next step is to develop how you share them. Have you figured out your patterns, your roles in those successes, the discomfort and your challenges? In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you. You'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into the lessons from each of those. How many times have you been sharing a story only to be interrupted by a person eager to share his own? When I'm working with clients on communication skills, I remind them to listen for understanding, not to respond. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your own related stories, to listen and consider which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. I am so grateful today. I get to speak with my friend Ash Rao, who is in Austin, Texas. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. We connected on LinkedIn years ago, probably 3 years ago or more. And we kept missing each other. We would write each other messages on LinkedIn about talking on the phone. I tried to get her on my podcast last year, and our schedules just never aligned. And so I am so grateful that Ash has agreed to be on the podcast. And we are now recording this long-awaited episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. Ash, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Sarah. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Well, I always ask at the beginning of my podcast, I ask my guests to share something about themselves that most people don't know, that wouldn't be on their resume or LinkedIn profile. And I ask this because I like our listeners to get a little bit of context about the person that they're about to hear more deeply about in terms of stories. So Ash, what do you think? Do you have something that you could share with us?
Something that nobody knows about me. I am an introvert by nature, in the sense that I get my best ideas when I'm alone, whether it's like taking a long walk or, writing or reading a book. But don't get me wrong, Sarah. I'm a social person. Of course, I enjoy the company of others, and I've been fortunate to have a really good circle of friends. But I need my time and space, and I feel that's when my creativity kicks in best. So that is something about me that many people don't know.
That makes sense. I would know that because of some of our conversations on LinkedIn, particularly our private messages back and forth. But I'm sure that most people wouldn't guess that about you because you are so social and warm. And I think sometimes people misunderstand what an introvert is. And one of my friends, Jerry May Rowley, that I saw speak at a conference many years ago, she's a Montana woman. She said, it's really about how you recharge. It's not about whether you're a social person. It's how you recharge your energy after a social interaction.
Exactly. And that's what I totally agree with that, because I get my energy by just spending time with myself, doing some self-reflection, even if it's doing things like, say, for example, routine activities like doing the dishes. If I just do it by myself, I feel that my thoughts just flow very freely. Like that's when I feel a lot of creative energy. So and I agree. I get that energy actually by being with myself.
That's really funny. I try really hard to figure out whether I'm an introvert or an extrovert because I get so much energy out of doing public speaking and doing workshops. But then it takes me a while to decompress and really process all that happened. So I guess some people would call that an ambivert because I am energized by those interactions, but I do have to take some time to recover afterward. My husband just reminded me of this because we have so much coming up, no longer virtual, is March 12th and 13th in Chicago. And we are leaving on Tuesday to make sure that weather in Montana doesn't impact our travels to get there. And we're coming back that Saturday, but then we are performing at a bar called the Silver Dollar Saloon in Butte, Montana on St. Patty's Day, which is that Tuesday after we get back. And my husband just reminded me that we're going to have to really have a lot of vitamin C and wash our hands a lot and get some rest after there's no longer virtual Chicago, because he said, you are never high energy after that conference. It's during the conference, you're exerting so much of yourself. And so it's interesting that you said that. That's an interesting point to bring up. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So you are a global recruiter for Verizon. That's correct?
Yeah.
And you also are a certified career coach. So one of the reasons I wanted to interview you is I'm so fascinated by people who choose to get into that area of service when it comes to individuals and corporations. And I have to ask, was there a time in your life that when you weren't doing this, that you felt like you were in the wrong place? Or on the other side of that, was there a time early in your career as a recruiter that you gave yourself a high five and had a realization that you were exactly where you're supposed to be?
That's a great question. I'm just trying to think. It's been many years ago since I started recruiting. I think it was about 10 years ago. And this was, not an intentional career choice at first. So when I got married, I moved to US, and after all the visa formalities and everything, I did get an opportunity to kind of start off in the HR area, and then I grew from there. I did go through recruiting as more of a learning process initially, so it was more about just learning through the ropes of being a recruiter. But that high five moment I did experience when I got really good at recruiting. I did notice that, when I started working, there were many things that happened. So there were actually mothers who were looking forward to getting back to workforce. When I got the job, I was just merely doing my job, but then they were so grateful for my work that they really would like they would write thank you notes. They would give me LinkedIn recommendations. And I remember this when a new college grad got his first job, or a mom returned back to the workforce, or a veteran got back to corporate side through my recruiting work. That would give me like a lot of satisfaction at helping somebody. That was like I would say the high five moments. And I've had like many of those during these years.
I would guess. Do you have any vivid memories of like a veteran or a mother that you helped?
Actually, many of them. So, generally after childbirth, most of the women do take a break from work, and more like a sabbatical kind of thing. And they're kind of rested in terms of technology and in terms of, coming back to the workforce and all of that. So, and whenever I'm recruiting, I don't look for like 100% match in terms of skill set or the technology, as long as they are 80% match. But if they have the right mindset and if they're willing to actually learn on the go. So it is the mindset that I'm actually hiring for, and not like the 100% talent portion of it. So I have hired people who have had taken like a couple of years break, or like 5 years break. Recently, I had somebody who was laid off from work like back in 2016, and he was eager to get back. And obviously, there has been a gap in the employment, but after talking to him, I realized that, he was really in touch with the technology. He tried to at least put an effort to kind of get to know what is going on in the job market and all that. And I love to help such people. So there are many examples like that. And it's like a day in and day out thing for me. And it's so gratifying, Sarah, to help someone. It's a very fulfilling part of my job.
Well, that particular person, the man that was laid off in 2016 and was unemployed for a long time, um, do you remember, you know, were you recruiting face to face, or were most of your calls online or just voice?
I do a combination of things. So if they are
Mm-hmm.
local, I do meet with them face to face, and then
Was
yeah, and recruiting for Verizon is my day job, and then I have my coaching practice. So coaching practice is where I actually meet with people face to face and help them with their
okay.
resumes and help them with their interview questions and
Mm-hmm. And
so that is more, I would say, when it comes to face, I deal more of it on my coaching
mm,
practice.
well, it sounds to me like that particular man that was unemployed since 2016 has a different place in your memory, just by the way that you talked about him. Is that somebody that you had a couple of important conversations with over the phone? Where
Yes, yes.
yes,
Yeah, and it just happened recently, so it's kind of fresh in my memory.
good. So,
Uh,
what was the clue? I mean, what was the clue that this person was going to be successful? That you knew that you could help. That this was a different conversation. What did you know?
yeah.
What was the clue?
Um, So when I was talking to him over the phone, he didn't really come up with the reasons for the gap. Usually, 90% of the people, whenever I talk to them over the phone, they try to kind of bridge the gap of employment. They try to say, okay, you know what, we got laid off, but then there was a reason, and they try to say some technology related reason. But this guy, when I talked to him, he upfront told me that after he got laid off, he didn't really actively look for a job because he had just become a dad, and yeah, his wife could not get enough maternity leave, and she had to go back to the job. So he kind of stepped up, and then he just voluntarily took like a couple of years off to stay back with the son. And he told me this whole
Wow.
story. Yeah, yeah, and it
Hmm.
was just for me, it is refreshing to hear somebody open up so honestly, telling everything that they
Hmm.
did and what they and he was clear about what he wants to do, and he was telling me that he understands that there is a bridge in the there's a gap in the employment, but he's okay to take a lower salary um,
Hmm.
because he wants to kind of get restarted, you know so I
Wow.
think just like the way he told me his honest story made me
Hmm.
realize that he has that mindset of being successful. When you're not trying to hide
Yeah.
something, when you're your authentic self in all situations, whether it's happened, whether it's worked out for you or not, whether if you're still authentic in the way you deal with people and you're honest, you will be successful at whatever you do. So I think that
Yeah.
made me kind of give him a chance.
I love that. And part of what I love about it is that here you are 10 years into this aspect of your career that you fell into, that it wasn't your intention. 10 years later, you're still finding these beautiful, inspirational experiences. You're not, I mean, I'm sure there are days when you're feeling exhausted and a little bit burned out, but the fact that you are still finding this satisfaction and reward in it, just it makes it so clear to me that you are in your element, that you're doing something that you were meant to do.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I have had many other situations like this. And, recruiting for a corporation, it's the whole 9 yards. It's not just the recruiting portion. So we need to deal with a lot of administrative related activities, a lot of paperwork, and all of that. But the main crux of the job would be to help somebody get the career that they want. And I think that is what is, very gratifying and fulfilling portion of my job. And I love that.
Mm-hmm. And I love hearing that excitement in your voice and the
Hmm.
care. I mean, that hearing the care in your voice, it's not about you. And I really
Yes. Yeah.
appreciate that. So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
were you doing before you were a recruiter?
Before I was a recruiter, I was in a sales and marketing job back in India. So I did all my education in India. I did my engineering, and then I did my MBA in India. Worked there in sales and marketing organization for about, I would say, like 8 to 9 months or so, and then recruiting. It was not an intentional career choice, but then I fell into it. But then I started to love it as I got hold of how things work around here, and I love what I do right now. But yeah, I mean, for me, um, sales was not really like I was not cut out for sales. I would feel. Yeah, yeah,
You know, what's really interesting about that is that you are in sales, even in
yeah, yeah.
recruitment. And
Mm-hmm.
so I just always like to think about it in those terms, because my friend Chris Spurvey wrote a book called It's Time to Sell. And I read it, even though I'm not a salesperson with sales in my title. And I read it years ago when I was in the public sector doing public affairs. And I realized that we are all in sales one way or another. And the fact that you found a career in sales that actually matches your care and interest
Yeah.
is
Yes.
really an important context. I mean, that's really important for people who are concerned about the word sales in their title, is that and going into marketing doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be marketing a product. You could be
Mm-hmm.
marketing a company or
Yeah.
marketing a person. And
Yes.
so you get
Yeah.
to use all those skills in your work, even though it's not and I'm using air quotes that you can't see right now, a sales position.
Yes. No, it totally makes sense. It's just that it's not in my DNA to think through the lens of just numbers and the targets. I would
Right.
rather, like recruiting, for example. Yeah, definitely. Every kind of job has some sort of a sales component to it.
Yeah. And you
We are
still have to
measured.
understand analytics, right?
Yes,
To a
yes,
certain extent
yes.
in
Yeah.
recruitment.
Yes, but I'm not driven by it. So I'm driven more by how I can help a person or my client, rather than how many hires I can have in a month. So that is not a
Right.
driving force for me. I would rather, focus on what I can do best, and then the numbers will follow. And I've always actually met my targets.
Hmm.
Without really focusing too much on, oh, okay, I have to hire like 10 people more this month to meet my quota. I have never
Hmm.
focused on that. Yes.
Right. And that makes so much sense in the context of, I have to come back to this because I'm so fascinated by it. The Strengths Finder stuff. It's
Mm-hmm.
not about the job itself. It's about how you're motivated to do it. So there are some salespeople, like software salespeople, that are also driven by the relationships they build and not necessarily by their target, their KPI. They're really sorry. The the measures that you use in, say, something like software sales are how much what your target is
Yes.
for a dollar value or a number of clients, number of phone calls, whatever. But there are some
Yes.
people that are in software sales that really, my friend Michael Thornton just changed from a big software company to a small startup because he loves the software, and he knows that this is going to help a lot of small businesses really succeed. And so to him, it really is all about the relationships. And I just love that you figured out what drives you, what motivates you, and have stuck with it. I mean, I just find that really inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. And it has worked for me. I just go where my inspiration strikes, and then I just move towards how I can really add value. And how I can help, rather than oh, how I can meet my quota, and this kind of approach has always worked out for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's more
yeah.
intuitive for you.
Yes.
So you get these aha moments all the time. Do you when you were younger, like in your teens, do you remember any particular moment that you feel like shaped that desire, I guess, to help? Do you remember a particular incident? For instance, I remember when somebody really helped me, and it was when my car broke down in the middle of an intersection in Colorado Springs. It stopped running, and people were just driving. This is rush hour. People are just driving right by me, not stopping to help. And finally, somebody pulled into the gas station around the corner and came running across the street through traffic to come see if they could help, and helped me push my car into that gas station lot. And I remember that so vividly because of the fact that so many people had driven by without helping. And I was this very small, like under 5 feet tall, under 100 pounds, high school junior, and nobody was stopping to help. So the people that did made a really big impact. Do you remember that kind of pivot point?
I'm trying to think. Nothing comes to my mind, but I can share with you a story that happened a few years ago, though. So, which has taught me like a very valuable lesson. It's a personal story, not in my teenagers, just a few years ago. I lost my mom to cancer. She was a very vibrant, very strong woman. And it all happened very suddenly. Like, she was very healthy. She radiated so much of positive energy. She was a teacher, by the way. She was a teacher back in India. And all her life, it's a service job, right? So many students, so many teachers. She has made an impact. And I remember it took a lot of years to get over the grief, but I do remember when she passed away, there were so many teachers and so many students who mourned her going away, rather than just the immediate family members or just the friends. There were just a whole circle of people. And she had made such a big difference. Like, her whole career, her whole life has been about learning, sharing, teaching other people. And at that moment, I realized how life can turn at any moment, right? And this is not a pleasant story, but I think it has a very valuable lesson. For me, this was like a life-changing moment for me, because I realized that, our time is very limited here. And that's when I made like a conscious decision to change my way of thinking, on how I approach life. Because until then, I kind of assumed that my mom would be there for me as my pillar of strength, like throughout my life. Like, I too just took her for granted. I was not prepared for it at all, right? And then this was like a sudden realization. It just dawned on me that, hey, our time is limited. And during and she was not too old when she passed away, like, but she had made such a strong impact. Like, there were so many people coming to our house and telling how amazing she was. And like, she had made a difference to a lot of people. And that's when I made a conscious decision that, what, because our time is so limited, we need to make that effort to do something, to make an impact, to make a difference in somebody's life. And I've been fortunate, Sarah, that my career somehow aligned with that service as well. It's I kind of help a lot of people in my line of work, but at the same time, on a personal front as well, it has somewhat changed me in the sense that now I cherish my family more. I tell them I love them more often. I try to do some social work or donate for a good cause. It's changed me in ways that was not me before. So I was a very carefree, like, happy-go-lucky girl before all of this happened. So I would say this was like a life-changing moment for me. It just happened back in 2013 or so. So
that is a beautiful story. That's a beautiful story. I was sitting here imagining the flow of guests coming into your home.
Yes.
To recognize your mother's legacy. And I can imagine, I was sitting there with you. I have no idea what your home looked like in India, but I was sitting there with you, my eyes filled with tears, imagining the legacy that she left. And it wasn't just the legacy of those hundreds of people that came through your home to say goodbye to her through you, but also in the legacy she left in you, and that lesson. I mean, I really struggle with the whole, everything happens for a
Yes.
reason, even
Yes.
though I believe that. But at the moment when you are losing your parent, or you lost your parent, because we lost
Yeah.
my father in 2014 in a similar way,
Mm-hmm.
um, I, as much as in that moment I couldn't have stood to hear that, years later, I know that to be true for the same reason, because that legacy she left in you to kind of shift your mindset about how you serve and the legacy that you want to leave, because that's what that kind of experience is, what makes you think about that, and it shifts your behavior so that you can live that legacy.
Yes, yes, it totally makes sense. At that moment, of course, I did not realize. I was just overcome with my own grief, and
Of
I was
course, of
mourning, and
course.
all of those lessons came to me later. Once everything got settled in, and I think it
Mm-hmm.
struck me a little bit later that, hey, you know what, this has happened, and but not at that moment. It took me a while to
Of course.
realize this, and for things to actually
Mm-hmm.
settle in. But it was a very profound lesson that I learned because of this.
Well, I think
So,
that's why it's so important to process those experiences externally. And what I mean by that is, we don't know, I would say 99% of the time, we don't know when a particular incident has shifted our view. Um, we don't necessarily know when we are in the moment that this is a pivotal time in our life, for the reasons that we figure out later. I mean, you knew losing your mother was a pivot point in your life. You knew things were going to change,
mhm.
and that your whole life, your whole outlook on your life and your role in the world was going to shift. But what you didn't know was how. And there's no way you
Yes.
could have. And being able
Hmm.
to share that story years later of how that shifted your perspective, of how that shifted how you see yourself and your place in the world. And you can visualize that stream of people coming in to say their goodbyes. You can visualize that and relive it to a certain extent, to be able to really confirm those lessons and the desire to make an intentional shift. But you can't do that unless you talk about it and tell the story in a way that brings back that vivid memory of the people coming in and telling you their stories of your mother.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was not even open to kind of sharing these stories or my experiences until just a few years ago. It took me a while to even start sharing,
Mm.
because I was not prepared to share what I was going through, and but I think I have decided to take the positive out of the tragedy that has happened, and change my life in a way that at least I know that she has made a difference to so many lives. If
Mm-hmm.
I can at least make an effort to do a part of whatever she has done for others, then I would consider myself very lucky.
Yes, well, you honor her memory when you do that. And
Hmm.
that's one of the things that I think is so important when we have a tragic experience like that, that we honor their memory. And if we don't allow ourselves that grief and that opportunity to share it, we're not really honoring their memory. We're not honoring the life that they had.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I'm so glad you shared that with me. Thank you, Ash. That's I, I
Yeah.
hope that listeners think about things that have happened in their lives in that context, to be able to look back and see those pivot points from the perspective of learning and growth, and um, maybe even share a story that popped into your head with somebody, to be able to process it more fully. And I encourage listeners to find somebody who will ask the questions that will help you really put color and depth into those memories so that you can fully re-experience it, but outside of the original and immediate moment of grief.
Yes, yes. And one way to go about this is not many people are willing to share it openly, but writing out those thoughts and just putting it on paper, and you can tear it up and then shred it later, but then just kind of organizing your thoughts and writing it down is also very it works like a therapy. For me, writing is an outlet for me. That's an avenue for me to just pour out all the thoughts and emotional outbursts, and many good things have come out, but writing has helped me a lot as well.
Yes, thank you. That's a great addition. Definitely writing things down, especially as things are happening and you can't necessarily go to that place of grief to share with other people. And then years later, you may look back at those notes and be able to see it from a totally different place and learn a completely new lesson, which is the value of having those memories and those stories. I encourage people when they're writing those things down, not necessarily, I mean, you can write down your feelings and your thoughts about that moment, but I also encourage people to jot down notes about a specific story or specific memory that they have of that moment. So, for instance, when I talk about No Longer Virtual, in that very first year that we got together for that conference, there were 23 of us in the room. And I jotted down this memory later that when we were finishing up and I was doing housekeeping announcements after that first day, and we would be meeting again the next morning, I remember this moment of saying to the group that my husband and I had been recommended to a Chinese restaurant nearby from the hotel staff, and that we were going to go. And I asked for a show of hands for others who might want to join us, so that if it was a larger group, I could give the restaurant a call and give them a heads up to expect a larger group. And I remember this kind of expectation in my head of seeing 8 to 10 hands go up. And it ended up being almost every hand went up in that room. And 21 of us or 22 of us walked down to this restaurant a block away together and had dinner together. And it was a few days after that I jotted down the story with kind of the specifics of how I had imagined the hands going up, what the room looked like, who was standing by my side, who sat by me at dinner, and the conversations that I overheard or had some small part of. I jotted down notes like in phrases because I didn't want to write down the whole story. I just didn't have time for that or energy for that. But just jotting down those notes helped me relive that moment and be able to see it from all kinds of different perspectives in terms of the memory itself and the learning and the feelings that I got as a result of having that memory so clear.
Yeah, totally. And thinking about something, without writing it would probably not be as detailed as when you actually just start using pen and paper. You become more and more introspective of what happened, and it will stay fresh in your memory. Totally agree with it. And I it's the same. For me too, writing is like an avenue for me to not just express thoughts and feelings, but to kind of relive the moments. And at the same time, as and when, and the more and more I wrote, writing improved as well. And if you can see my blogs, most of them are self-improvement based. I feel that, whenever I need to improve on something, for example, if I need to build more confidence or get over procrastination or anything like that, these blog posts will not only help others, but then it is self-motivating for me as well to go back and refer to what I have written. So
yes, definitely.
Right? Yes. Yeah.
Definitely. Yes. And I think that those are the most inspiring blog posts, because people understand you're acknowledging your own humanity and the things that you
Yes.
still need to learn. You're never saying, I know all this. It's,
Mm-hmm.
oh my goodness, I needed a reminder this time because A, B, and C happened.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember writing this article I think it was a few months ago. It was about how I am a procrastinator and how I try to, just keep things to the last minute. And I had written this whole detailed blog about, things that I would say like 10 tips to avoid procrastination. And it was mainly for my sake, like for me, it was for my sake to improve myself. But then I just shared it for the sake of sharing. I think it was on not on LinkedIn. I think it was on Thrive Global, and this magazine picked up my article and put it on their cover of that magazine, the Powerhouse Global magazine. And I later got a chance.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it was amazing. They called me, the publisher called me and said, your article looks perfect for our, that month's edition. And they put me on the cover. And later on, I actually got a chance to co-author a book with the same publisher as well. And, I got to publish that book as well. So I was not thinking about all of this when I was writing, when I was actually just focusing on getting to improve myself. But the results vary, and then it just ended up in such a beautiful way of it worked out perfect for me.
Right.
So that's what I love. Yeah.
Yeah, it just comes back to that very beginning of our conversation, which is when you're doing something in the context of serving others, but also in growing yourself in self-reflection, that you know what kind of impact it's going to have.
Yes.
So tell me the name of the book. What was the name of the book again?
Yeah, so that actually came out last year. It's called Tough Roads Create Tough People. So this was a UK-based publisher called Powerhouse Global. They were the same ones who actually published the article in the magazine as well. So it's on Amazon too. So this is like it's like we are a bunch of co-authors, about 15 of us, who have written about how to overcome adversity in life. And my chapter is titled "How to Find Inner Strength During Struggle." So the incidents that I shared with you, I have put that in the book as well, and how what I have learned and what are some of the ways that we can actually find inner strength, during the tough times. So that was the theme of the book. So again, writing has always helped me. Yeah.
So for our listeners, I will have a link to that book in the blog post associated with this podcast. And I will also have a link to I'll have you connect with Ash on LinkedIn. I'll put a link to her profile, and whatever other links I think about, including your website, I will include in there. So for our listeners, we will have links for Ash on that blog post associated with today's podcast.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. That's going to be awesome. I would love to connect with anybody who resonates with the theme of my blogs. And
Wonderful. Ash, thank you so much for taking the time to sit with me and have this conversation. As always, I really enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about you and connecting with you on a deeper level. So thank you for taking the time.
Oh, you're welcome, Sarah. It was a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
How could you tell me that you're going away?